When purchasing a home in Naples, Florida, there are some key considerations that you will want to take into account to make sure that you don't get in over your head. And in this video, we're going to be talking through all of the hidden costs, all of the real costs that you should expect when you are purchasing a home in Naples, Florida. Now, I have been doing this for some time now. It's been almost 19 years with my real estate license here in Florida. So I have seen all types of real estate transactions and what you should be able to expect. Now, usually what happens if I speak to somebody who purchased a home through another agent, generally speaking, they didn't understand a lot of the closing costs that they paid when they purchased the home and then when they go to sell a home. In this video, we're going to be talking about purchasing a home specifically. Now, in Florida, much like anywhere else, you're going to have a lot of the typical transactional costs when it comes to buying real estate. And one of the things that we'll have to account for is your inspection. You're going to have an inspection as part of it. You absolutely should. And in the inspection, depending on what it is, if it's a condo, they don't have to check out too many things, and those are generally around $300, $350. And if it's a single family home, it is higher than that. Now, that can be up to thousands of dollars if you have mold and radon and all kinds of additional tests included as part of that. If you're on the water and you have your seawall inspected, that can go up. Now, generally speaking, no matter what the cost of the inspection is, the inspectors usually find more money than that in the inspection reports. So it's always a good investment to make sure that what you are buying is what you hope and expect that it is, and then you can negotiate if it is not. So besides the inspection, if you're getting a loan, you would have appraisal fees, and those generally range from $350 to $500. Not too big of a thing in the scheme of the transaction, but it is something else. There are additional lender fees. You'd have to get those from your lender because every lender is a bit different, but we're going to talk about the real estate transaction fees themselves. Now, most real estate transactions have title insurance that are part of that. In Collier County, which is where Naples is located, that is typically a buyer expense. In fact, the way our contracts work in Naples is that it basically stipulates that it is the buyer's expense. Can that be negotiated so the seller pays for it? Absolutely, but that's just not what is typical. Now, when it comes to the expense for title, that is $575 for the first $100,000 of the purchase price, and then that goes to $500 per additional $100,000. So if we're looking at, let's say, a nice round number of a $1 million purchase, that would come out to $5,075 is the cost of that title policy. So it's something that you will want to take into account with your purchase. Now, as you go higher in price point, the rate gets less expensive. So it actually, after $1 million up to $5, that goes down to $250 per 100,000. So much cheaper as you get exponentially larger. There are also settlement fees. So most real estate transactions in Florida do use a title company, and they'll typically have a settlement fee. Now, typically that ranges anywhere from $350 upwards to around $1,000 for the transaction, and both sides usually have their own settlement fee. If you have an attorney that you want to have involved in the transaction, that would be an additional cost as well. Now, when it comes to property taxes as a part of closing, these are prorated. So what that means is essentially if you buy the property on July 1st, halfway through the year, then the seller would be responsible for the first half of the year. You as the buyer would be responsible for the second half of the year. That makes a lot of good sense. But how does that work? So we pay our taxes in arrears, meaning we pay our taxes at the end of the year. So we don't necessarily know how much the real estate taxes are. So right now it's 2024. January 1st through October, that would be the seller's responsibility, but they're going to be basing that on last year's number because they didn't get released this year's number. Now, at this stage, we all know what the property taxes are in 2024, but the title company is going to be estimating it based on what last year's taxes were, do the proper proration, and then you will get a credit for the amount that the seller is responsible for, so that when the full bill comes out for you at the end of the year, you're responsible for all of it. I just want to make sure that you understand that, because at closing, you're getting the credit for it so that you can have the money to be able to pay for it at the end of the year. A lot of times people in a real estate closing will say, great, I only need to bring this amount of money to close, not taking into account that the seller was crediting them a substantial amount. And then when the tax bill rolls around, how am I supposed to pay this tax bill? So just make sure that you plan accordingly and it all works out as it should. Next, we're going to talk about HOA fees. If you are buying a property in a homeowners association, there are certainly fees that are associated with that. A lot of times the community, the neighborhood will have some type of an assessment, a special assessment or a transfer fee that you as the buyer will pay. Those can range anywhere from $500 to thousands or tens of thousands of dollars, depending a lot of times on how luxurious the neighborhood is. They tend to go hand in hand. And so you'll want to understand what those transfer fees or what the capital contribution would be to the homeowners association right up front in a real estate transaction. And that's something that your professional agent should be able to get early on in the process. Now, when it comes to the ongoing HOA fees, these work very similarly to how the taxes work, and that they're prorated. So let's say that the homeowners association fees are paid on a quarterly basis in a neighborhood. Those are paid in advance, and so you will owe the seller a credit for their unused portion of that. If you're purchasing, say, mid-quarter, you'll owe them half of unused amount back. That comes by way of a credit on the settlement statement from you to the seller. Now let's talk about insurance. Boy, I have a lot of videos about insurance here in Florida on this channel. In fact, my latest video you can click on right here above. And when it comes to insurance, there are a lot of different scenarios. If you're newer construction and farther away from the coast, you're going to have a much more favorable insurance rate. If you're closer to the coast, older construction, maybe not up to the latest building codes, you could look for a fairly substantial insurance bill on a yearly basis. Also, is the home in a flood zone? Because if it is in a special flood zone, you may have to also pay flood insurance, which is typically a good idea considering some of the storms that we have had. So you want to take that into account. We always recommend that you reach out to your insurance agent early on in the process, typically during the inspection period at the latest, so that you understand the full dynamics of what it costs to insure that particular property, and that typically gets collected at closing. Some of the other fees that you can expect when you close on a property, you'll have to deal with certain utilities. Some of those utilities like power and water may require a deposit as well, but you'll need to contact the local utility, figure out what you need to do. A lot of times they'll run a credit check to see if that can be waived, or if you've got an existing account with them, a lot of times they'll waive that, but don't count on that. I would certainly reach out to them and understand what that deposit could be. And there are not very many neighborhoods in Naples that actually have natural gas, so that's not typically something that we have to deal with, but some neighborhoods do have that. And again, that would just be another utility that you'd have on an ongoing basis, but as part of closing, you want to make sure to transfer those accounts over to your name. Now, as we go through these fees, it's important to understand that everything can be negotiable. Now, you may have real estate commissions that you're responsible for, or the seller may be offering to pay those real estate commissions. You also have the opportunity potentially to ask the seller for a closing cost credit. That's becoming more prevalent considering that we've moved into a buyer's market. You as a home buyer have a lot more power than you did a few years ago. And so this is a really big and helpful thing for you to help offset some of those closing costs to make that part of your overall negotiations. The other thing that I want to mention is that new construction works slightly differently than resale homes or resale purchase. So in new construction, you typically have a lot of additional costs, more costs than you would if you bought a resale. And some of those could include a builder fee. Some of those could include an initial amenity fee. And also the builder is typically not willing to pay for something that's called the doc stamps on the deed. The doc stamps on the deed is typically a seller paid expense. And that's something where, again, we've spoken to people who either were unrepresented or used another agent, bought new construction, paid the doc stamps on the deed, and then they go to sell the property and they're responsible for paying that again. So just know if you buy new construction, there are some additional costs there. That being said, the new construction, they typically are very good. If you ask them for a closing cost estimate, they will put together all of those fees so that you fully understand those upfront in the process. Our number one goal is always to have no surprises whatsoever when it comes to real estate. Now, certainly inspection results and other things, you can have some surprises in the transaction, but financially you should not have any kind of surprises that come up to you last minute. That really is and should be a thing of the past, and if you do have something like that happen to you, and so my hope is that you don't have anything like that happen to you, and that's where hiring a professional agent to represent your best interest is extremely important. So if you are considering buying or selling in Naples, Florida, me and my team would be honored to be able to have a conversation with you about that. Have a blessed day, and thanks so much for watching.